Hi everyone. So welcome to the second lesson in the series of the three phases of colonialism in India. And the second part is about the laissez-faire phase. Laissez-faire is a French term and it means to allow something. And it basically pertains to the free trade phase in India. Mark also the time period, so it's 1813 to 1857, and we'll be looking at very interesting things like the development of the railways in this phase, the opium trade that flourished during this time, and the intricacies regarding that, the commercialization of agriculture that happened. We'll be mentioning it briefly in this because we'll have a separate lesson devoted to the commercialization of agriculture and the different sort of revenue collection systems that prevailed during the British rule in India, and also looking at British exports to India. First and foremost, what were the features of this second phase? So the first thing that happened was that this is where the structural problem started for India. Now, structural problems here emerged out of colonial exploitation and distortion, and this is partly because the economy was no longer feudal or capitalist. So it was somewhere in transition, and then of course Indian interests were not being given their due, and this is why India was facing that kind of an issue. The sort of mode of production that was prevailing was the colonial mode of production and not feudalism as we knew it. The second thing was that the basic character of India's economy changed for the worst. From becoming a net exporter of industrial goods, India now became a net importer of British industry-made goods, and that is obviously never a good sign. But remember, in the first phase, the opposite was happening. We had mentioned to you during the mercantilist phase, what was happening is that the British, they were bringing their bullion and precious metals into India, then they were exchanging them for goods such as textiles and spices in India, and then these Indian goods were being sold by them in overseas markets, and that is how the company was reaping profits. But this was set to change. The third thing was that the Indian handicraft industry suffered largely, declined in the British era. There was also this period of de-urbanization and de-industrialization along with massive unemployment, and none of this happened in a single stroke. It was something that was happening over the course of time. So, whenever a native ruler's territory was annexed to the company's dominion, as was say happening through the doctrine of lapse, which we've spoken about before, or as in when a railway network penetrated a region. Now, why was the handicraft industry declining, you may wonder? The first thing is, see, arts and crafts, or even culture and arts in India for that matter, had flourished during the time of yore because of royal patronage. और जब उन कोर्ट्स उन राजाओं का जो पेट्रनेज था वो घट गया, वो कम हो गया या ख़त्म ही हो गया एक समय पर आके, तो उससे ये सारी चीज़ें, ये सारी प्रॉब्लम्स आने लगी. Industrial goods, दूसरी बात, they were cheaper and good in quality. So when you were getting, something cheaper of relatively the same or better quality, then people moved to that instead of handicrafts. Also, the marketing of these goods was better, and exhibitions were held to show and create knowledge about the product. And the middle class, this is a bit of a behavioral and sociological reason, the middle class was attracted to British goods as a status symbol. And the British also imposed heavy duty on Indian products. Then what happened, that because of this stage, what was happening is increased hunger, undernutrition and continuous decline in age expectancy. Obviously, when people were suffering so much, there was no way that their health would remain proper, and age expectancy, etc. Lots of famines were happening, which we'll be reading about one of those in this lesson as well. There was a singular thrust on territorial expansion, and it ended with the cessation of the East India Company's rule. We have spoken about this, that the British were aggressively pursuing this policy of acquiring as much territory as possible, and then following the uprising of 1857. In 1858, when they passed the Act for the Better Governance of India, or the Government of India Act of 1858, everything came under the British Crown. From the 1820s, there was the impact of utilitarianism also on the East India Company's administration in India. And this is because at some point, now what is utilitarianism? Utilitarianism basically says that greatest good of the greatest number of people. तो इस बात को ध्यान में रखते हुए the British administrators in India began to think on the lines of that, okay, if we have to stay here in the long term and we have to develop this as a colony, we will need to introduce certain reforms, and that is where the socio-cultural and its many other sorts of reforms, welfare policies that were being pursued by the British back then came about. Principles of free trade were flouted at every stage. Now this is very, very important because a lot of times it is thought that, you know, the British, since this was laissez-faire, free trade was the norm, but it was not so, because there was a huge chasm or gap between the colonial rhetoric and colonial reality. So what was happening is that India had to admit British goods either free or at nominal tariff rates. So this is free trade so far. The adverse impact was on the Indian handicraft industry because deindustrialization was leading to deurbanization. Heavy duties were being imposed on Indian goods. So there was they could not compete in England. If it was free trade, then it should have been proper free trade for every kind of good, but that was not happening. There was favoritism towards British made goods. Also, the entire legal structure was overhauled, and it was thought that, you know, we'll overhaul this system to serve colonial capitalist and commercial interests, but there was no intention of speedy justice for the native. The sanctity of contract became the foundation because millions of economic transactions were needed to promote imports and exports were to be made viable. So this judicial system was based on the idea that we have to do something for the sanctity of contracts. इसीलिए एक स्टेज पे आके जो planters थे, especially indigo plantations में so many protests etc. happened because there was so much of bonded labor. People were unable to get out of the contracts etc. even when they did not want to cultivate and work in there. Now, as regards the specifics of this phase in India, the first thing that happened is that it marked the demise of the power of the East India Company traders or merchants, and there was rapid ascendancy of the British capitalist industrialist class. And this is very, very interesting. See, earlier what was happening, there were merchants, right? So everything was revolving around these merchants. We had spoken about things like dastaks and how they were engaging in private trade also, and how they were misusing the Royal Farman of 1717. So all these things were happening, but now it was shifting towards the British industrialist or capitalist class. By 1813, the Industrial Revolution was almost complete. See, it's never really complete in the sense that something like industrialization, it is prone to constant reinvention. As technology develops, as different kinds of economic policies happen, so that kind of industrialization never really ceases. It's a dynamic process. But if you talk about the basics, then yes, 1813 was around the time that it was coming full circle, so to speak. The colonial administration and policy were necessarily directed to serve the interests of the new class of Britain. What was this new class? This class was the British industrialist and capitalist class. See, the situation was very different now because, and why were these people so important? Because you have to understand that there has always been some sort of nexus between politics and capitalism. Ultimately, it has been seen that the capitalist class is the sole pressure group, and it has been so for the past and will continue to be so in the future. And perhaps you could look up the term crony capitalism and mention in the comments what you understand by crony capitalism. Furthermore, you need to understand that the British industrialists, they did not have any interest in monopolization of the export of Indian handicrafts. Now, this is what was happening before. अगर आपको याद हो तो हमने ये बात मेंशन की थी कि ईस्ट इंडिया कंपनी वाज आफ्टर द ब्रिटिश क्राउन टू लुक आफ्टर इट्स इंटरेस्ट एंड इट वांटेड मोनोपोली ओवर ट्रेड फ्रॉम इंडिया. बट the British capitalists were not interested in this because they were obviously interested in increasing their coffers. So they needed increasing outlets for their goods to make profits, and because the internal market of Britain had virtually been saturated. But why was this happening? Why was the British market saturated? See, industrialization sounds like a great process, sounds like a great change. लेकिन आपको ये समझना है कि जब इंडस्ट्रियलाइजेशन हुआ, and if you look at pictures of the conditions in which the workers were living, and we have spoken briefly about this, you can look at the lesson on sociology, I think we covered it there, where we spoke about the class division that arises as a result of industrialization and capitalism. There is a set of people who are very well off, they own the means of production and they reap huge profits. The proletariat, on the other hand, are the workers who do not get as much. So the bourgeois, they lead great lives, whereas the proletariat are left to fend for themselves. They get very meager income to remain as cogs in that system and to keep the wheels running. तो ये हो रहा था. तो ब्रिटेन में भी वर्कर्स की कंडीशन बहुत अच्छी नहीं थी, तो दे कुड नॉट अफोर्ड टू बाय ऑल द आइटम्स दैट वर बीइंग प्रोड्यूस्ड. So they thought that okay, now we need to have more markets, so India could be one. There was cheap import of raw material and food grains from India. और ये जैसे food grains का जब import होता था ब्रिटेन में, यानी कि इंडिया से एक्सपोर्ट होता था, तो it was so bad that there was in fact a moral failure of the colonial state in 1943. और हुआ ये था कि the Bengal famine is said to be the result of food scarcity caused by large-scale exports of food from India for use in the war theatres and consumption in Britain. India, it is said, had exported more than 70,000 tons of rice between January and July 1943, even as the famine set in. And there are plenty of debatable and controversial views around this, how cognizant the British administrators were, how sensitive they were to the needs of India during this famine, and you can read those pieces. So we won't give a final verdict here, but just to let you know that this was one of the factors. Now, the government of India tried to increase the consumption of British goods by following a policy of fresh conquest and direct occupation of protected areas like Awadh. तो वो ऐसा इसीलिए कर रहे थे क्योंकि उन्हें लगा कि भाई इवेंचुअली अगर हम इन स्टेट्स को अक्वायर कर लेंगे तो हम अपनी पॉलिसीज़ भी यहाँ पर उस हिसाब से चला पाएंगे, इंक्लूडिंग मेकिंग पीपल बाय आवर गुड्स फॉर ग्रेट प्राइसेस एंड इन टर्न गेटिंग चीप रॉ मटेरियल. सो all this they were doing. Many, including British officials, political leaders and businessmen, were advocating a reduction in land revenue so that the Indian peasant could be in a better position to buy foreign manufactures. तो इतना दिमाग उन्होंने लगाया कि भाई अगर हम इनसे कम कीमत वसूलेंगे लैंड रेवेन्यू में तो इनके पास इतने पैसे बच जाएंगे कि फिर ही हमारे गुड्स खरीद सकें. So maintaining their status as consumers or improving it. Then they also advocated westernization, and in one of the lessons we had mentioned about imitative westernization or imitative modernization for that matter. And why were they doing this? Because they thought ki okay, if people become westernized, if they start looking and aspiring towards western values, they will obviously buy our goods in order to fit in and aping our culture. Foreign imports were rising rapidly. तो ये मतलब इस सेंस में हो रहा था कि imports of British cotton goods alone increased from 110,000 pounds sterling in 1813 to 6,300,000 in 1856. So this is what happened. There were heavy duties on Indian goods in Britain on the other hand. So, ranging from a duty of 67.5% on Indian calicos in 1824 and duty of 37.5% on Indian muslins and Indian sugar as well. It had to pay in Britain a duty that was over 3 times its cost price. So, very, very onerous duties. Then the British promoted the sale of Indian opium in China, even though the Chinese had put a ban on it because of its poisonous and harmful qualities. और यहाँ पे आप ये देखिए, ये गौर फरमाइए कि the import of opium into Britain was strictly banned. But the British were so aware of running their commercial machinery that they maintained this trade in China, even though they prohibited it in their own country. And here is where H. Wilson said something very profound. He was a British historian, and he said that had this not been the case, had not such prohibitory duties and decrees existed, the mills of Paisley and Manchester, this is where a lot of these factories were coming up during the Industrial Revolution, would have been stopped at the very outset and could scarcely have been set again in motion even if the power of steam was used. So such was the condition. And so reliant was Britain at that time, and to maintain its capitalism and industrialization, on in fact deindustrializing, deurbanizing, and exploiting India, that this is what the true picture looked like. Now, as regards the development of means of transport, like the railways, you need to know firstly that there were plenty of stakeholders involved. The British realized by this time कि अगर हमें अपने ट्रेड को, अपनी एडमिनिस्ट्रेटिव कैपेसिटी को स्ट्रेंथन करना है, बढ़ाना है, तो हमें रेलवेज और भी मीन्स ऑफ ट्रांसपोर्ट को भी अच्छा करना पड़ेगा. क्योंकि अब मान लीजिए हमें एक जगह से दूसरी जगह गुड्स भेजने हैं, तो हम कैसे भेजें? हर बार बाय रोड जाना, शायद बाय व्हीकल जाना पॉसिबल ना हो, या जैसे यहाँ पे इंडिया में जो उस टाइम पे चल रहे थे मीन्स ऑफ ट्रांसपोर्ट, मान लीजिए बुलक कार्ट्स एक्सेट्रा, तो दे वर नॉट वेरी प्रैक्टिकल और स्पीडी फॉर दैट मैटर. So, and there were so many stakeholders who had an interest if the railway were to develop in India. कौन थे वो? The British capitalist industrialists. They wanted the expansion of the railway network in India. The British industrialists associated with the steel industry wanted it because they would get orders for the supply of rail lines, steam engines, wagons, and other machinery and plants. British bankers and investors, so that they could invest their savings to earn more profit, and even the government of India, along with the East India Company, for administrative, military reasons, for suppression of rebellion in time, and to protect the colonial state from foreign aggression, and ensuring rapid mobilization of resources in times of famine as well. तो ये सारी चीजें हो रही. Okay. So when we talk about the development of the railways, the earliest suggestion to build railway in India was made in Madras in 1831. And then it was suggested that there should be a construction of steam-driven railways in India, and this was first proposed in 1834 in England. और यहाँ पे गारंटी सिस्टम आया. गारंटी सिस्टम में ये डिसाइड किया गया that Indian Railways would be constructed and operated by private companies, and in return for which they would be guaranteed a minimum 5% return on the capital invested, and the government of India would give it to them. But eventually this guarantee system did not work out very well. We'll find out about that shortly. Meanwhile, Dalhousie, when he became the Governor General of India in 1849, he was an ardent advocate of rapid railway construction. He laid down in 1853 an extensive program of railway development, along with proposing a network of 4 main trunk lines linking different parts of the country along with the hinterland. And in fact, the first railway line then ran between Bombay and Thane, which was opened to traffic, and it was called the Great Indian Peninsular Railway. अब इंडियन रेलवे स्टार्ट हुई थी प्राइवेट एंटरप्राइज की तरह, जिसमें कि हमने गारंटी सिस्टम की बात की. फिर क्या हुआ कि दिस सिस्टम प्रूव वेरी कॉस्टली एंड स्लो, एंड इन 1869 द गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया डिसाइडेड टू बिल्ड न्यू रेलवेज एज स्टेट एंटरप्राइजेस. Now, when the speed of this railway extension was not satisfactory for officials in India and businessmen in Britain, after 1880, they combined the two efforts, and they said that now railways would be built through private enterprise as well as state agency. And for a long time, you should know in fact that the railways were not able to give the sort of return that was thought about, but gradually it did catch on. And the important aspects here were that it was looked at as a non-loss making opportunity for British investors, and there were Indian investors also, but in a very microscopic minority. Then Indian interests were not kept in mind when this rail was being planned and constructed and managed. So political, economic and strategic interests of colonialism dominated, which further led to inequalities. Above all, railway rates in terms of freight charges were deliberately made discriminatory to the extent that the rates were in favor of the exports and imports, which favored the colonial state, and passenger interests were not prioritized, which should have been the aim if you really wanted to improve the lot of Indians. And an interesting fact here is the conquest of Burma was also necessitated by the requirement of railway and fine quality rice. अब रेलवे का रिक्वायरमेंट ऐसा क्या था, आप सोचेंगे रेलवे का रिक्वायरमेंट ये था कि बर्मा टीक जो था, जो टिम्बर वहाँ से डिराइव होता था, टेक्टोना ग्रैंडिस, दैट वाज यूज्ड टू मेक रेलवे स्लीपर्स एंड कोचेस. So that was a great resource if it could have been acquired. And of course, free trade was imposed on India in a lopsided manner. So all these things happened, and India was, so to speak, in the clutches of the British by then, and that will gradually then bring us to the third phase in the next lesson. So I hope you understood and enjoyed this. It was slightly long because we had to cover the railways, but the development of railways and means of communication are important parts. All right, thank you so much. See you next time.